Candlestick as a mic. Candlestick as a mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. So I'm one of those people caught in the crossfire of thinking that cluttercore is the ideal way to decorate one's home. And I'm often looking at reference pictures because it can quickly go from cozy to chaotic. And one character's decor style who I feel truly gets it right is thrifty old Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants. Have you heard of this show, or is it just me? I look at this man's living room. I don't see a creature wanting to collect wealth for wealth's sake. No, I see a creature dedicated to sentimental knickknacks and doodads and trinkets. He's just like me, for real. And one of those lovely trinkets is the subject of today's video. That's right, we're making Mr. Krabs' first dollar. Unlike my last video where I knew exactly what I was doing and the result to expect, this time is going to be different because I don't know how to make a frame. You're going to come along with me and we're going to figure it out together. When this idea popped into my head, I immediately thought, why has no one done this? I can't be the only one who's thought of this. Surely there must be an Etsy market for this at least. And yeah, I Googled it, and of course, several people are doing that. It's a really popular show, SpongeBob SquarePants. Have you heard of it? Apparently, other people have. Anyway, the examples I found weren't quite my interpretation of things, so I decided to make my own. Now I'm no stranger to just having stuff laying around somewhere, and I found this old IKEA frame which I think would work perfectly as a starting point. I took the measurements of the frame and made a mock-up on my iPad using Procreate. I brought in the reference photo and started fitting it to the size of the mock-up. I used the liquify tool to fill in all those gaps where it didn't quite cover up the sketch. I then traced out the edited photo on another layer and printed out that black outline to actual size. I cut that out so we could use it as a stencil to mark out on a single piece of cardboard. And now we have a fancy new base to build on some clay. I covered the cardboard and all the clay before using some hot glue to attach it to the frame. I'm using Crayola Model Magic. It's lightweight and it's super easy to use out of the package, but I quickly learned that it was not going to give me the smooth surface that I really wanted. And I came up with the solution of dipping my little fingies in some water to even it out that way. Then after a while I got kind of concerned if this would affect like how it dries. After I did some research, I ultimately found that it's probably more prone to cracking, and I didn't sign up for a crack problem. But I continued on with this method, all the while trying to think of something that would help me have an even surface. I found one. It's called Warbla. It's a thermoplastic. I love her. I have had this roll of Warbla for 8 years. I got it at the height of my interest in cosplay. I used it for one costume and that was it. Yeah, I moved it across the country with me and moved it from every LA apartment I ever had. Is it ever worth it to do that? No. But today, it worked out for me, so I can't tell you either way. Now, not only will my frame be more even, it's also going to be super sturdy. If you never worked with Warbla before, there's a lot of YouTube tutorials that'll show you how to use it, and they'll go a lot more in depth than I'm about to. Basically, this is a material that becomes super malleable when you apply heat to it. What I'm doing is cutting out some Warbla to the size of the frame pieces, and then I'm warming it up while it's sitting on top of the frame, and then just forming it to fit. I'm being careful not to handle it when it's too warm because it gets super gooey and then it tends to stick to your fingers and then it rips, and that's annoying. I'm using my fingers and pressing into all those smaller spaces with whatever was like closest around me, which in this case was a mechanical pencil. And to give the whole thing some more structure, I'm also making sure to attach some of the Warbla to the original frame in the back. That way it's not held together by just some hot glue and cardboard. After the Warbla is all cooled down, it's time to prime it with a base coat. I always recommend using a white primer for super cartoony stuff because the end result ends up looking a lot more bright that way. We're going to let that dry as we tackle the woven backing. This is some fabric I have because I was a victim into thinking that I could get into rug tufting as a hobby. And the fabric that you use for that ends up working pretty well here. No special trick here or anything. I just hot glued the backing that came with the IKEA frame and then looped the fabric over. Just being careful not to cover up any of the stuff that makes it hang on the wall. And now, the final piece of the puzzle, the dollar itself. If I truly loved myself, I could have just colored this dollar in Procreate and printed it out and called it a day. But that ain't me. That'll never be me. I want this thing to have the texture of a dollar. I want the government to come in here and be real confused. FBI agent, if you're listening, because I know that you are, go ahead and strike that from the transcript as a favor to me, please. All right, thanks. I'm gonna use this technique that I learned in 5th grade art class. See, the arts are important to teach kids. Now I can make a thing from SpongeBob to have in my house. Basically, if you soak paper in coffee or tea, not only will it leave the paper looking this lovely antique color, but it'll also give it that nice crinkly texture that I'm after. So in the exact same way that we mocked up our frame, we're gonna mock up the dollar by just tracing over the reference picture. And then that kind of got me thinking, do you think they have presidents on their money in Bikini Bottom? Like, who is this little shell? Wait, yeah, clams are like sentient beings in Bikini Bottom. They're kind of like bats or something. So did Bikini Bottom elect a bat equivalent as their president one time? They got a dark history. What if they made a Riverdale style prequel to Bikini Bottom and how it was formed? Oh my God, like a House of Dragon version of Bikini Bottom, and it's so serious and there's no jokes. I would watch every single second of that show. Same deal, we're gonna print it out to size, but I'm gonna print out a bunch because I wanna do some experimenting. All right, I printed the money. This one's on like not quite cardstock thickness type of paper, and this one is just plain computer paper. So let's cut them all out and commit fraud. I'm gonna put a baking sheet in my sink, and I tried 2 different versions of coffee. One was normal drip coffee, and the other is like half a tablespoon of instant coffee mixed with some water. The computer paper's super fragile when it's wet, so you kind of have no choice but to just leave those be. But for the thicker paper, you can afford to do some texturizing here. And once the thicker paper had absorbed some water, I started to do varying levels of crunching. Mild, medium, Crunchwrap Supreme, duh. I let all of them soak for about 1 to 2 hours, and then I left them out to dry. Now we can paint all these dollars. I painted on the 2 shades of green, making sure to leave the printer ink still visible, and then that leaves me a line to follow to go over with a Sharpie. Now I want to show you my money. I want to show you how all the methods turned out. I didn't finish out all of them, but I did make sure to at least get paint on them so you could see how they react. This one is just plain computer paper and acrylic paint. It kind of like goes up like that. Kind of flimsy, not what I was going for. This is a dollar that I soaked with normal coffee instead of instant coffee. I don't know if you can see, but the paint is so much more streaky than the ones I did with instant coffee. I think it's because the instant coffee leaves so much more residue and the paint really likes to grab onto it. This is plain computer paper, soaked in instant coffee. Nice, natural crinkle. These lines I painted on with a paintbrush instead of using a Sharpie. It's giving very much dollar. See, tricked you. That was actually audio from a $20 bill. This is our thicker paper Crunchwrap Supreme version. I knew I wasn't gonna go with this one, but I thought it would be cool to show you what would happen if you just went crazy with it, which is honestly kind of a cool decor prop to have on its own, just like sitting out on a table. This is no coffee treatment and just with the thicker paper. It's also the brightest one of the bunch because it doesn't have that brown undertone, but the brown undertone is what excites me. It looks so warm and inviting and like a dollar. But the method that I ended up going with was thicker paper, soaked in instant coffee, with just a little bit of crinkle. Like, that's so dollar. That is such dollar. I should go to prison. We have all of our pieces together, and now it's time to go in and paint the actual frame, which is what I was most nervous about because all of the close-ups in SpongeBob are so beautiful and hand-painted, and I'm not a painter. But I just painted on a base color and then added more and more brown and went in with some shading. I even added this green glow that's coming in from the dollar in the reference photo. I thought that was a really nice touch. They think of everything. Then finishing up with those highlights and blending it all together. I was pretty happy with how it turned out, but there was still one element that I was kind of on the fence about including. Do we add a black outline to this thing or do we just leave it? I decided to take this to Instagram and make a poll. I sat there waiting for the answers patiently, and right away there seemed to be a clear winner. Black outline it is. But we did have a decent amount of anti-liners, including my sister-in-law Marla, who voted twice, with 2 different accounts. Marla, that's fraud. I went in and painted the edges of the frame so that hopefully when you look straight on, it'll look like a really thin outline. And from this footage, I actually went back and reduced it even more. It's really difficult to not have the outlines of the frame compete with the ones inside of the dollar. I saw way too late someone had sent me a message suggesting that I make the outline like a dark brown instead of a black, and I really wish I would have done that, because it does kind of look a little bit too harsh. Maybe if I had gotten the color more accurately on the frame it would have been okay, but at this point I really do think that that brown outline would have helped. But anyway, from here I finished out the edges and painted that black, so it didn't just look like a floating outline on top of the frame. It could at least trick you into thinking it was a shadow. I don't know. And I almost forgot that little metal plate. I cut out a piece of cardboard and then covered that in one piece of Worbla. To make the little bolt details, I took a tiny piece of Worbla, warmed it up, and then made it into a little ball. Then I attached the 4 of those onto the big piece of Worbla, and then warmed them all up together in the heat gun to make them all stick together. And I primed, painted, and then added its own little black outline. Now to put the whole thing together, I didn't want to risk reactivating the Worbla by using hot glue, so I went with just standard super glue. I attached it on the center of the dollar, and then also on 2 diagonal corners. And then I weighted them down while they dried. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I would change a few things, including getting a thinner frame to start out with, and I probably wouldn't have built the model magic up so high because I'm losing some details in between here. And if you end up trying any of the methods that I used in this video, feel free to tag me on Instagram or TikTok. I really would. I'd love to see that. Yeah, let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and feel free to give me any ideas or suggestions for what to do next. All right, thanks for watching. Love you guys. Who knows about this show. Why are the cats just coming to me? When this idea popped into my head, I immediately... Okay, now you're just being a sabotage.